and the landlord won't return your calls, but the rent keeps going up and up and up?
Find out what you can do about it. Tune in to Housing Notebook, Mondays at 8 p.m.
Reactionary landlord.
When you think of the golden age of radio, you're bound to remember the performer whose hold on the heartstrings of America spanned almost 3 generations.
Well, thank you, Jack. Yes, it's Max Schmid, and I'm your host for the golden age of radio. Sunday nights at 7 p.m. here on WBAI, presenting the finest in radio's history, comedy, drama, mysteries, science fiction. Won't you join me Sunday nights at 7 for the golden age of radio? Only here on WBAI New York, 99.5 FM.
I hope you feel that way too.
Hi, this is Spike Lee, and you're listening to WBAI, Community Radio in New York City. WBAI exists almost entirely on your support. Please be generous. Thank you very much.
The stars, pull one down for you, shine it on my heart, so you could see the truth. Damn, this love I have inside is everything it seems, but for now I it's only in my dreams that I can change the world. I'll be the sunlight in your universe. You would think my love was really something good. Baby, if I could change the world.
Greetings and welcome to Walden's Pond on this June 10th, 2012. My name is Shelton Walden, and I'm the host and producer of Walden's Pond, the weekly radio program heard every Sunday between 1 and 2 p.m. here on WBAI, 99.5 FM, and on the World Wide Web at WBAI.org. We're here every Sunday at this time. We discuss health, culture, politics, and so much more. We speak with newsmakers and authors of all types. And this afternoon, we'll be looking back 20 years at the 1992 United Nations Earth Summit, a gathering which was supposed to help solve some of the world's environmental problems, some which have been identified over the years, and they tried to solve some of them, but many problems still remain unresolved. We'll be talking this afternoon with Professor Bjorn Lomborg, the director of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. He's been a leading critic of some of the environmental activities and a skeptic of some of the things that some of the models have been used to solve some of the world's environmental problems. So he'll be joining us very shortly, and we'll be taking some of your phone calls for Professor Lomborg at 212-209-2900, all on this afternoon's Walden's Pond. Stay with us.
Sunlight in your universe.
afternoon, one and all. Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond, on this Sunday. This, 2 weeks to go in spring, late spring Sunday in New York. And all the people who are enjoying the Puerto Rican Day Parade, I hope you're having a great time. There'll be a music program following this one, Consumo Latino, which of course will cover that and a lot more at 2 here on WBAI. Good afternoon again. I'm Shelton Walden. This is Walden's Pond on this Sunday. And we appreciate you tuning in last week. We took some of your calls about some of the events that are swirling around in our world. And 20 years ago in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, there was the United Nations Earth Summit, a gathering of the world to help solve some of the more pressing environmental problems that were being faced at that time. Yours truly was there. I was there for the entire 2 weeks. I covered it here for WBAI. You may have heard some of the reports during the morning program at that time. And it was a very interesting gathering, what was going on there, and meeting some of the more interesting people who were there, including the current governor of California, Jerry Brown, who I met and who was there, who gave a talk there. There were many other people, many other people, known and not so known, including the late Bella Abzug, who was there, who I had the opportunity of flying back with on the plane coming back from Rio, and got a chance to talk with her about some things, and it was a pleasure meeting her as well. So here we are, 20 years later, and global warming, of course, is very much in the news. A concern about the heating up of the planet. That's been one of the big topics over the last 20 years, global warming and the rise in temperatures, the rising sea levels, the danger to our coasts, etc. And there's been other environmental problems which have come up since then. However, my guest this afternoon, Professor Bjorn Lomborg, who has been here on this program in the past, we actually featured his documentary "Cool It" and his book on a membership drive of some months ago. He has written a cover piece for Newsweek International about the Earth Summit of 20 years ago, and indeed, coming up on June 20th, 22nd of this month, there will be a gathering of Rio Plus 20 down in Rio, same location, much shorter conference, but nonetheless a gathering of about 50,000 people. Has received not that much attention in the news, obviously, because there's been lots of other stuff going on at the moment, including some serious economic problems, but nonetheless this is a very, very serious conference. However, Professor Lomborg, who is director of the Copenhagen Consensus Center, lamented the missed opportunity of Rio Plus 20 to do real good for the world, saying, this month's Rio Plus 20 meeting is likely to focus on failed solutions to first world concerns like climate change. At the same time, it will do little or nothing to address much more important third world environmental issues. The summit risks just pandering to first world concerns and delivering meaningless platitudes. My guest, once again, I'm very pleased to have this gentleman on, is Bjorn Lomborg. He is the head of the Copenhagen Consensus Center and the author of The Skeptical Environmentalist and Cool It. Professor Lomborg, welcome.
Hey, Sheldon. It's great to be back.
Yeah, great to have you here with us as well this afternoon. And by the way, he has consented to take some phone calls from you this afternoon at 212-209-2900. First of all, how are you doing? You are in the States this time.
I am, actually. I'm uptown from you, but I'm sorry I didn't have time to come down. So I'm in New York.
And what brings you to this stateside this time?
Well, fundamentally, it is the Rio Summit that I want to talk about and that I want to get people to think about. Fundamentally, it's all good that people want to get together and talk about the global environmental problems. That's great. And I think, we should both be joyous that we're trying to say, all right, 20 years on, what can we do? And also, let's remember, Rio was actually not the first Earth Summit. In 1972, the UN held its first environmental summit in Stockholm, actually. And so it's 40 years since we started putting the environment on the agenda. And look how far we've come in some very obvious ways. I don't know if you remember, but back then, rivers were catching fire. We were having huge environmental problems in the first world. We were just realizing, wait a minute, this doesn't work. We actually have to clean up our act. And in many ways, we have. We've cleaned up the water. We've cleaned up the air in the rich world. We've stopped cutting down our forests, again, in the rich world. So in many ways, the rich world has dealt with many of its environmental problems. Remember, this doesn't mean that there are no problems. Of course it doesn't. But we have moved a lot in the right direction. But my concern is that means we have moved on and say, now we worry about global warming and a lot of other things. And those are real issues. But let's just remember, these are nowhere near the most important environmental problems for the third world. If you ask people what are the big environmental problems in the third world, they typically get it wrong, even if you get a lot of tries. The big three environmental problems are water pollution and air pollution and poverty. And if you'll just allow me just briefly to give you a sense of size.
Sure.
Water pollution, that's basically lack of clean drinking water and sanitation and hygiene, which cause about 3 million deaths each year in the developing world. And air pollution is actually, and that surprises even more, most people in the third world that die from air pollution die from indoor air pollution. And, we don't even have that concept in our imagination anymore. But of course, 3 billion people, almost half this planet's population, cook and keep warm by using dirty fuels like cardboard or dung or wood that they burn inside their huts. And that kills especially their women and their kids. And we're estimating about 2 million people die each year, and at least another million die from outdoor air pollution. And so again, we're talking about 6 million deaths. That's about a tenth of everyone who dies on the planet die from these very simple environmental problems. And then, of course, poverty, I mentioned as the third one. A lot of people get a little surprised. Why would poverty be an environmental problem? Well, the point is, if you're poor, you can't afford, or you can't at least see your way through worrying about the environment. If your family doesn't get fed, you will raise the last rainforest to grow even bad slash and burn for agriculture. If your kids are cold, you will cut down the last tree to keep them warm. And of course, you will also get a lot more kids if you don't know that there's any social security or possibility of getting taken care of when you get old. So fundamentally, as long as we have a very large proportion of the world still being poor, they are not going to be able to say, well, we actually want to focus more on environment. And so really what we see here is, I would like us to step back and say, if we're going to go to Rio, if we're going to have another Earth Summit, if we're going to talk about the world's environment, shouldn't we talk about what are the most important things we can do and where we could do a lot of good? Let's focus on air and water pollution. Let's focus on poverty, and let's make sure that we actually make this planet a much better one so that when we meet in 20 years' time again, we can actually say we really tackled the important environmental problems of our age.
Absolutely. You mentioned when this first idea for the summits began in '72. The title of the conference was focusing on the human environment. And we were speaking about this earlier, that a lot of the concern now is, and nothing wrong with this, is the focus has been a lot on eliminating a lot of fossil fuels, if you will, electric cars that will diminish the carbon footprint of the planet. But you say that this has been an overemphasis on to the detriment of some really basic human needs.
Yes, and in some very, very obvious ways. I mean, the UN has produced a leaflet for the summit, which reeks of first world no better feeling. I was just amazed when I looked at it. You know, it shows us these, as you mentioned, the electric cars and showcase those as a way to save the planet. Let's just remember, electric cars are great. In 20 or 30 years, they will probably have taken over the planet. That's great. But right now, they're incredibly expensive. They're the explosivity of a very few, very rich first worlders they cost $50,000 or more. Most people in the third world are still dreaming of getting their first mechanized transport. The Tata, the very, very cheap car in India for a couple of $1,000. So again, let's get our sense of proportion back. This is not how you save the world. And of course, when you talk about how do most people die from indoor air pollution, the 2 million people that die from indoor air pollution, they do so because they have really, really bad fuels. The trick here is not to give them solar cookers, which only very rarely work really well, or to give them solar panels, which of course cannot provide anywhere near enough power to actually cook or keep them warm. It's about getting them fossil fuels. Now that makes people feel somewhat uncomfortable because obviously in the long run we want to cut down on our fossil fuel use, but we should say when it's for poor people and when it's something that could actually help them with a lot bigger environmental problem, namely indoor air pollution, yes, they should be using kerosene, just like we did when we transitioned from wood and other dirty fuels some 100 years ago.
But by the way, were you at the Earth Summit in '92?
No, unfortunately not. I'd have loved to have gone. It sounded like you had a great time. But again, my sense is I was at the climate summit we had in 2009 in my home city, Copenhagen.
Okay.
And my sense is of these very big meetings is that there are a lot of show and there's a lot of people with a lot of goodwill, but there's not very much openness to a different sort of approach to this argument. And that's why I'm really trying to say, hey guys, shouldn't we just hold back a little bit, perhaps have a little less good intentions and a little more smart policies? And I think that's probably better said from somewhere else, like, for instance, New York.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. I'm sure there are people at the summit who will be attending, or maybe people at the UN or diplomats, et cetera, who share your views that global warming is a very pressing concern, but the more immediate needs of poverty, basic water, sanitation, you've laid that out in the documentary you did, sanitation, water, air, that would help increase the living standards of many millions of people around the world, should be put back in the forefront of the agenda. Would you say so, or do you think that's been eclipsed by the global warming argument?
I think there's a number of people. I actually met with Shazu Khan, the guy who runs the Rio +20 summit 2 weeks ago in Kazakhstan. He's the Undersecretary General of the UN, and he's from China, and he recognizes that you can't just solve all problems with well-meaning Western arguments. I don't think he agrees with everything I say, and I'm certainly not going to take him as a proponent of my arguments. But, look at China. China, over the last 30 years, about 600 million people from poverty. It's a totally unprecedented and amazing achievement. But remember, they didn't do so by putting up solar panels. They did so by very polluting, coal-fired GDP growth. And again, the real issue here is to say, what is our proposal? Well, in the long run, we do want to fix global warming, but I would certainly say for the hundreds of millions of poor people, and in reality, there's probably like 1.3 billion people who live on less than $1 a day. They need more economic growth. They need to actually be able to come out of that trap they're in right now. And that has to do with alleviating poverty. That has to do with, for instance, getting a more successful Doha round. The other thing, the other big international agreement that has totally stalled, we talk a lot about the Kyoto Protocol, but of course there's another issue, namely getting free trade, especially to the third world, which would dramatically improve their life conditions. Those are the kinds of things that we also need to remember to focus on. So again, my point is simply to say, let's get some more realism back into the conversation. And I think one way we can see that's happening is that it has been a lot harder to get an agreement on the outcome document in Rio +20. They have been negotiating for almost half a year. They met in an emergency session last week here in New York, and they could not agree. And I would say that's to a very large extent because the third world is just not willing anymore to just say all the pretty platitudes that the first world want us to talk about. Oh, we should have a green economy. We should deal with global warming. They're like, our kids are dying from indoor air pollution. Maybe we should do something about that first.
Okay, we're on WBAI. We're talking with Professor Bjorn Lomborg. He is director of the Copenhagen Consensus Center in Denmark. He is the author of The Skeptical Environmentalist and Cool It. I want to ask you, the solutions you're prescribing sound reasonable and actually very progressive, because we want to eliminate poverty, which is a scourge not only abroad but here too, here in the United States as well. But you've spoken about this for years. A lot of people think that you're not progressive. You're sort of a heretic in some ways. That the paradigm is for looking at global warming and solar panels and electric cars and other very, very sound ways of helping ease some of the environmental burdens. So why is it that people are not listening more?
Well, I think a lot of this is because our politics, and I'm looking from the outside, but that'll be very true in the U.S., have become very symbolic. It's more about appearing good. It's more about saying the right things than actually do stuff that really works. And listen, in the long run, I have no doubt that this world will go green. I don't know what exactly the technology is going to be, but it could very well be solar panels and wind turbines. The problem, though, is right now they're much more expensive than fossil fuels. And that's, of course, why we're trying desperately to subsidize them. We spend lots and lots of money and don't get very much pickup. Remember, about 0.2% of the entire world's energy comes from wind, and 0.1% comes from solar. It's not very much. And even if we dramatically increase it, it's not really going to be a major player even by 2035, which is the longest our predictions go out. So fundamentally, this is not about putting up solar panels to feel good, for instance, in the third world. It's about making sure that we long-term do something that will make the technology much better available. That's why I've been arguing, if you want to tackle global warming, you should be spending a lot more money on research and development into green energy technology. If we could innovate the price down of, say, solar panels so that they were cheaper than fossil fuels in the next 2 to 4 decades, we would have solved global warming because it would be cheaper and everyone would buy it. So if we want to fix global warming, we should stop with our policies that basically subsidize at very high cost ineffective technologies now. And we should be spending less money, but much more smartly, and actually achieve green technology to become competitive and outcompete fossil fuels in the next 2 to 4 decades. But at the same time, if we want to be good people, if we actually want to deal with the real environmental problems that are here right now, right this moment, we should be much more focused on air and water pollution. That was what we did back in '72 when we met in Stockholm. When we started, we had the Environmental Protection Agency. We started having Earth Days. That was what we wanted. We wanted our rivers to stop catching fire. We wanted our kids to stop coughing. And so we did an enormous amount of very smart and very simple technologies that actually meant that now our local environment is much, much cleaner. I simply want us to acknowledge that that's probably also what the third world wants.
Again, we're on WBAI with Professor Bjorn Lomborg. Before we go to the phone calls, just to bring it more to a domestic sense, President Obama has caught a lot of grief, I think somewhat unnecessarily, for the Solyndra, the imbroglio that he's been in, giving subsidies to green companies, I think in this case solar panels, I believe, I'm not quite sure, that was a loan guarantee, and that company went bust. And that has come under a lot of scrutiny because people said that you're trying to target companies that may not give it a return on investment. In this case, the company went bust. What do you think about programs and policies like this to try to, as you will, try to jumpstart or give assist to green technology?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no doubt that there's a lot of people who've been trying to utilize this politically. But I honestly think that the cylinder case is a very good example of how we should probably not try to deal with global warming. Because remember, Cylinder was a company that thought they had a great idea of how to produce more effective solar panels, essentially cylinders. That's why they're called Cylinder. And I'm not an engineer. I have no idea whether that was a good idea, but it could very well have been. So the point is, we want to stimulate people to come up with new and smarter ideas for green energy. That's great. But the problem was we didn't stimulate their innovation. We spent about $500 million on building a factory to produce it. And that's not what you want to do. You want to invest in innovation. And then, of course, a lot of other people in the market economy will actually come along if the innovation turns out to be good to produce the stuff. So I would much rather have had that Obama had spent the $500 million on a lot of different researchers in a lot of great ideas. Now, it may not have been Cylinder. It probably wasn't Cylinder that had the good idea. But had we spent that money on cheap researchers, we could have had lots and lots of different ideas investigated. And one of them probably would have been a really good idea. And that would then have been marketed today, instead of us just spending money on actually producing it. Because the production part is what really kills us. That's the expensive part, where you end up just producing lots of inefficient, in this case, solar cylinders. And so it becomes a little bit like in my home nation of Denmark, where we put up lots and lots of wind turbines. And, they fill up the landscape. We feel very proud about it. We look at them and we say, wow, we're so green. But in reality, every time we put up a wind turbine, we just end up spending lots and lots of money on subsidizing it. I would much rather that we innovated smarter, newer wind turbines that in the next couple of decades would become so cheap that everyone would want to put them up, not just rich, well-meaning Danes to feel good about themselves, but everyone also, the Chinese and the Indians.
Okay. We're on WBAI at 99.5 FM, Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond, speaking with Professor Bjorn Lomborg of the Copenhagen Consensus Center located in Denmark. It's 1:28 here on WBAI. We'll be taking your phone calls for the good professor at 212-209-2900, 212-209-2900 on this Sunday, the 10th day of June. We're talking about the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit that took place, the United Nations Earth Summit that took place in Rio back in 1992. In 2 weeks' time, there will be 20 years plus summit in the same location, looking at the same problems, from the same bat channel, same bat time. And have you made any progress? That's what Professor Lomborg is assessing right now. And with you on the telephone at 212-209-2900 in a matter of seconds. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, it's 1:30, bottom of the hour here on WBAI. Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond in New York. WBAI.org if you're listening around the world on the web. We're talking with Professor Bjorn Lomborg of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. We're talking about the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit. We're here every Sunday between 1 and 2, and we discuss health, culture, and politics, and newsmakers and authors, like the gentleman we have on the phone right now, Professor Bjorn Lomborg. We're taking your phone calls at 212-209-2900. I'd like to know where you're calling from and your name, where you're calling from. Let you know that we'll be off for the next 2 weeks due to special programming here on WBAI, so please stay tuned for that. There'll be a lot of special programming over here over the next several weeks at all hours here on WBAI, so please stay tuned and honor your pledge, because this is a listener-sponsored radio station and in New York, and honor your pledge from the May Drive in particular. Thank you. All right, let's go to the busy phones. 212-209-2900 for Professor Bjorn Lomborg of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. Brief questions for our guests, please. And please turn off your radio, name, and where you're calling from. Those are the only rules. Thank you. WBAI, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Hi. Who's this calling?
Oh, yeah. Marilyn from the Bronx.
Okay, got to make a question. Just brief question, please.
I have long been interested in ecology, and I wonder if your guest would consider why it is that the history of ecology the word was invented by a man named Haeckel in Germany. One of the American early ecologists was Victor Ernest Shelford, who was among those who founded the Ecological Society of America. And of course, around the same time, there was Gifford Pinchot, even Theodore Roosevelt, Stephen Mather, who was one of the leaders of the National Parks Association.
What's your question, ma'am?
What?
What's your question?
My question is, why does your guest think that the history of ecology and the environmental concern is so little known? And
okay, that's good. Bjorn?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ecology is I think increasingly acknowledged. We have to keep a very strict sort of division between, as I believe the caller was talking about, the scientific study of ecology, which is really trying to understand how nature works and how nature interplays, and what is ecology in sort of a more political setting, organic farming. The whole idea of going back to nature, maybe the eat locally, those kinds of things. And I think that part, the sort of more political part of ecology, is somewhat more problematic, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of arguments for why, for instance, organic farming is not a good thing in the third world. Remember, for instance, in most of Africa, it's actually one of the descriptions from the leaflet I was talking about before with the UN for Rio +20. They talk about how beautiful it is that some countries or some farms in Africa are going organic. Let's remember, most of Africa is already almost organic. And it's not because they want to, it's because they can't afford fertilizer, because they can't afford the good seeds, they can't afford the pesticides that would keep the pests away. And so, again, let's be honest and say most of Africa probably needs less organic farming, not more. This is, again, very controversial and not something you want to hear in a rich Western, well-meaning setting. But if you're poor, if you don't have enough food, it matters a lot more that you get food on your table. If you're rich, if we can actually tackle poverty, then, of course, you start worrying about a lot of other things, and you start moving towards being much more environmentally conscious, wanting to have higher air quality standards, higher water quality standards, stop cutting down your forest, and all these other good things that we want to encourage. So, again, Rio and Rio +20 ought to be a lot more about making sure that people get sufficiently good lives that they can actually afford to care about the environment.
Okay, very good. I've heard this, by the way, what you're saying a long time ago. People were saying some similar things about right here in the United States about water and air, and I don't know if people are still not listening. I don't know, but it seems like it goes around and around again and again.
It is a long discussion, and remember, once you have solved the problem, it seems like, then everybody has solved it. But we fail to understand the depth of despair that much of the third world lives under. Remember, there's still 1.3 billion people who don't have access to electricity. And so when the sun sets on them, it's literally dark. I mean, we can't imagine what that kind of life must be. And so, again, I would like us to start thinking about these people actually need access to electricity. And it just blows my mind that we would want them to either not have it or have it in a much poorer form than the ones that we expect to have and the ones that have made us rich. And again, it doesn't mean we shouldn't fix global warming in the long run, but it means we should also recognize it's not the only problem in the world.
Right. Okay. 136 here on WBAI, 212-209-2900. We're speaking with Professor Bjorn Lomborg, and you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air, ma'am.
Thank you.
Who's this calling?
Oh, my name is Yara Tuma. Yara.
Okay, where are you calling from, ma'am?
From the Bronx.
Okay, and we have a little static on the line, but
Yes,
go ahead, please.
But, yes, I've heard even on WBI in certain shows where certain professors have spoken that organic farming is actually cheaper than chemicalized farming, whatever, artificial fertilizers. Also, the other question, my question is the professor on Monsanto's payroll? Thank you very much.
Yep. First of all, no, I'm not on Monsanto's payroll. I don't take money from anyone to do any of these studies. So I've been working at the Copenhagen Business School, a government-funded school in Denmark. So just for the record, no, I'm not. But much more importantly, I think if we look at the organics conversation, generally it's not cheaper. I mean, if it was cheaper, in some way you could say very simply, then everyone would have gone to organics. And certainly all of the studies show that virtually all organic farming is more expensive because you're essentially saying there's some things you cannot do. And that simply means that it gets harder. Now, there's nothing wrong about something getting harder because you're paying for a service that you actually want, namely that we put out less pesticides, that we put out less nitrogen fertilizer that leads to dead zones and for instance, the Mexican Gulf. So there's some good things about this. It's fair that it costs more money. But we just got to be honest and say this is something that the rich world can afford to do, but it's not obvious that that's what the third or the poor world will want to do. And just one final thing I think we often forget is that right now we have about 7 billion people living on the planet. More than 2 billion of these people are dependent on artificial fertilizer. That is, if we did not use artificial fertilizer, we could not feed them. There would literally be 2 billion people who'd have to die. And so right now, there is no alternative to having a mechanized and industrial agriculture. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at ways that we can make it less impactful, and I definitely think anyone would urge us to do that. But we need to be realistic. If we produce more organic food, for instance, in the first world, it simply means that we will have to have less organics elsewhere.
Okay. Thank you, caller. 212-209-2900 here for Professor Lomborg, and you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hello? You're on the air. Hello?
Yeah, good afternoon, Shelton. How you doing?
Fine. Who's this?
My name is Ed. I'm calling from Jamaica, Queens.
I hear your radio.
Yeah, I'll turn it down.
Please.
I'm sorry.
Okay, question, please. Question, please.
Quickly. I agree with what you're saying, Professor, but let me play devil's advocate for a minute. What do you say to people that or organizations that basically say this? Number one, the problem of poverty and the problem of cleaning up environment is not only an environmental problem or global warming problem, but it is also a political problem because a lot of the technologies do exist, but in certain places like in Africa where I have some relatives, you can't get certain things into certain countries or to certain villages because of warlord control or tribal differences or just general local politics, number one. And number two, what about the damage that is being done now by the third world wanting to catch up? I mean, it may not be fair, but the bottom line is no one knows when the tipping point is going to be. And by the time these people catch up to a point to where they're affluent enough to use the existing technologies to reduce pollution, it might not be any use.
Right. Okay. Let me respond. Thank you for your call.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. And those are two very good questions. I think there's no doubt that there are many, many other problems in the third world when you talk about warlords and the whole situation of, corruption and systems that don't work. I'm not saying that it's easy to fix the third world problems. I think a lot of other people have tried really hard, and we've not succeeded very well. But my point is simply to say, if we go to Rio and say we're going to fix environmental issues, let's focus on the ones where we could do an immense amount of impact at fairly low cost before we focus on things where we can do fairly little good at very high cost. So it's very clear we could much, much better handle some of the simple issues of water pollution and air pollution. Those are things we know how to do, and we know how to do fairly well. With respect to the other argument, namely, what if we just let the third world grow? We say, yes, it's sad, we need to get rid of all that poverty. And then in the process of them getting rich, we actually end up crossing lines. That means we get a tipping point. It turns out that global warming just got to be way too bad. That's a very real issue. And my concern is simply that for the last 20 years, certainly since Rio in 1992, we've been talking about a Kyoto Protocol style of approach to global warming. Let's promise each other we're going to cut carbon emissions. And of course, nobody's actually done so because emitting CO2 is just a side consequence of burning fossil fuels, which is what makes a lot of nations rich. For instance, China pulling 600 million people out of poverty. So it's very hard to get nations to give it up. That's why I want us to focus on smarter policies, that is, invest dramatically more into research and development into green energy, so that in the next 2 to 4 decades, green energy becomes cheaper than fossil fuels. And then everyone will switch. So I totally agree with the caller. We should make sure that in the next couple of decades, we have a solution to global warming. But we should also do so by making smart policies for climate change. And then, of course, at the same time, remember that there is a number of other environmental problems that really also need our attention.
Okay. Thank you, caller, as always. 212-209-2900, 143 here on WBAI. And you are on the air.
112-209.
Yes, you're on the air. Yes, you're on the air, ma'am. Who's this?
Hi. Please be patient, Sheldon, as I try to formulate a statement and a question.
Well,
yes, please,
ma'am. Okay. Oh, God. All right. WBAI, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hello?
Good morning, Shelton.
Hi, who's this?
Good afternoon, Shelton.
Yes.
Thanks very much for the programming, and good afternoon to your guests.
Yes, who's this calling, ma'am?
My name is Naomi, and I'm from Brooklyn.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm calling to offer another perspective on why organic farming, especially in third world countries, is critical if you are looking at water resources. I've done a number of environmental impact studies around the world, both in third world and Western countries, and it is, in fact, farming using chemicals that is a major contributor to contaminated and polluted water. And when you have organic farming, you do not have this problem. In addition, many of the difficulties with disease and infestation in crops is because in countries like Africa, you do not have the diversity of seeds that would allow more traditional usage of organic and biodynamic farming.
I understand, ma'am. You have a question? Ma'am, I understand it, but it was a continent.
I don't have a question. It's more of a difference of opinion
and
a disappointment in not tying together caring for the land and the resulting contamination of water and air.
Excellent. Good. Let me ask the question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Sheldon, if I could just briefly comment, because I think in many ways, I mean, Naomi has a good point in saying we should be careful not to have a situation where we end up polluting the water. And certainly industrial agriculture pollutes the water in the sense that it puts out a lot more nitrogen in the water, and that leads, for instance, to dead zones further down, as we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico. But let's just remember, this is not pollution that actually harms people, but it is pollution that harms the environment. So it does have an impact. But again, I think most countries, and certainly most developing countries, would see this as a very easy trade-off. Do I want to have more water pollution in the sense of dead zones further down, but at the same time being able to feed my kids? Or would I rather make sure that I provide more for nature, but have less food for my kids? That's an easy trade-off. Again, this doesn't mean that in the long run we shouldn't be able to do both. But I think we have this tendency to believe it's very easy when you sit in your comfortable first world chair and are well-fed to say, of course, they should worry about the environment first. But in reality, of course, the issue is to make sure that they get much higher yields so that they are able to feed themselves, move on with their lives, get better economies, and also, in the long run, actually afford to start worrying about the environment.
Okay, 146 here on WBAI. I think that's the time. Yes, Shelton Walden here, Walden's Pond, 212-209-2900. Taking your calls and questions for Professor Lomborg. I didn't mean to cut off the last caller, but, you know, spending time debating over the details of a question is going to waste time, okay? Just say what you want to say. Thank you. WBAI, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hello?
Yes, how are you doing, Shelton? How's your guest? This is Reverend Johnson calling from El Paso. I'm on the computer.
Yes, how are you?
Fine. You know, I have a question for your guest. One of the city I'm in now, they have one of the world's biggest water filtration plants on the globe. And I just returned from Liberia, and about 30 years ago, most of the world was still running around carrying water. And when I went back to Liberia, because they had a 15-year war, they still are carrying around water because their water system is still down. So my question to your guest, is that where we're going now in the world, that most cities and countries will have these multi-billion-dollar water filtration plants? That's the question I have.
All right.
One other question I have is, can the common people in the world, without a governmental or NGO, formulate their own, solve the problems of the planet's water? I'll hang up and listen. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And those are both great points. I don't know about the Nigerian setup.
I think you said Liberian.
Liberia. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I didn't know
I
that.
think you said Liberia. I believe you said Liberia. Yeah.
But the fundamental point is, as one of the previous callers also mentioned, because there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of other problems in third world countries, it's often very hard to get these multi-billion-dollar setups to work. We know that getting clean drinking water and getting sanitation isn't about getting what the sanitation people call the gold standard, that we get sanitation piped into every home in the third world. That will be the long-term goal. But it's simply about very, very simple ways of making sure you separate the effluent from the drinking water. It's about wet or dry pit latrines. It's very, very simple and low-tech things that we need to get in on the ground. So again, if you have a poor setup in a poor country where it's hard to get things working, work with very simple technologies. The beauty of those are that they're both much more robust and they're also much cheaper, so we can actually reach many, many more people. So again, I would simply point out to the caller that we need to make sure this doesn't become about us putting in the technology that we use in the first world, but it's about putting in sufficient technology to actually save a lot of people. And that, of course, brings me entirely to his other question. Why is it we don't have the developing world and the communities in the developing world setting their own agendas. Well, I mean, obviously to a large extent they are, because they are taking their own taxes and using them typically in their own countries. But there is global problems we need to talk about, and global warming is one of them. That's why we meet in Rio, because we want to talk about what do we do about the global environmental problems. I just want to make sure that we talk about them in a way that will work, that we talk about, all right, let's fix global warming, but not in the way that's failed for the last 20 years. Let's spend money instead on research and development into green energy to make it cheaper, to make sure that we actually have a solution in the next 20 to 40 years. And likewise, let's also make sure that we get a lot more of the understanding out in the very simple technologies like wet or dry pit latrines, that we get those very simple ways to combat indoor air pollution, for instance, that we get kerosene out there. And then, of course, also that we deal with poverty, which is the underlying driver of much of the environmental degradation. And that's, of course, about making sure we get a Doha round successfully concluded, that we actually get free trade back on track, so that many others can join us in having more prosperity and see a future for their kids, and then, of course, start worrying about the planet.
All right. We're almost out of time here, Professor Lomborg. And again, I want to thank you very much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. The Rio Plus 20 summit coming up in Rio on June 20th through the 22nd. Do you see are you optimistic about the outcome of that summit?
No, I can't say I am, and I don't think anyone really are, because it has been set up as a situation where first world countries have put their agenda on the table, and it's an agenda that even if you're really, really enthusiastic about it, probably can't work in third world settings. And the third world is not going to want to have anything to do with it, because they care much more about their very simple environmental problems. So no, I don't think a good outcome is likely to happen in the end of June. But, of course, this is a long journey. We've been on this track for 40 years, since Stockholm in 72 and Rio in 1992, where you participated. This is not about the summit in 2 weeks. This is about making sure that the planet gets on a good track. And if failure in Rio is what it takes for us to start thinking, oh, wait, maybe we actually need to tackle this smarter in a different way. Maybe we need to change our perspective to focus on the things that matter, especially for the third world, and focus on ways that will actually tackle, for instance, global warming and investing in research and development of green energy technologies. Then this will not have been in vain. Then maybe we'll actually have had a failure that brought us back on the track to tackling the world's big environmental problems.
All right. Listen, Professor Lomborg, I want to thank you very much. By the way, you can catch Professor Lomborg on Newsweek International. He's actually on the Daily Beast. He has an article on the site about the Rio Plus 20 conference entitled Poverty Pollutes, a message to the organizers of the Rio Plus 20 Environmental Summit. Also the author of The Skeptical Environmentalist and Cool It. Professor Lomborg, I want to thank you very much for sharing part of your Sunday with us, and good luck in your travels here in New York.
Thank you very much, Sheldon. It was great to be back.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Take care.
That was Professor Bjorn Lomborg of the Copenhagen Consensus Center in Denmark. He's been sort of like a thorn in the side of a lot of environmental people for a while, but trying to get some real solutions to some serious problems that we continue to face on an ongoing basis 24/7. And he is trying to really give some meaningful solutions, as many other people are, to these vexing problems that we face. So I appreciate his appearance this afternoon on Walden's Pond, which slams the lid on things for today, for this June 10th, 2012 edition of Walden's Pond. Shelton Walden here, your host, speaking at the moment. We're live at the moment here on WBAI. We appreciate your attendance and your listening to the program this afternoon. We appreciate all the calls who called in this afternoon. And we will be away for 2 weeks. We'll be back around the beginning of July. We'll be away for special programming on this radio station over the next 2 Sundays. So we hope you will stay tuned for those programs. Next week will be the Clearwater Festival, and they'll be live from Croton Point, New York, in Westchester County, here locally. The Clearwater Festival, a legendary festival, will be taking place next weekend. WBAI will be broadcasting that live on these airwaves next Sunday. So you may hear me at that time from Croton Point. So we hope maybe you'll come out and say hello. But come to the festival. It's a big thing, big deal, and always is, has been for a long time. We hope you'll play your honor your pledge, and also you can follow me on Twitter at Walden's Pond. Twitter at Walden's Pond. I think it's Walden's Pond at Twitter. Yeah, Walden's Pond at Twitter. And you can subscribe to me on Facebook as well. I think you can do that too. Walden's Pond on Facebook. I'm social media maven these days. So that's it. Anyway, stay tuned for a gentleman who's coming to the studio. I'm not sure what his name is. What's your name? Alfredo Alvarado. He'll be here for Consuelo Latino. And he will be giving you the best of the highlights of a great day in New York. As always, the Puerto Rican Day Parade down Fifth Avenue. I understand they're honoring Mr. Cruz from the New York Giants. Yes, Victor Cruz. Oh, yes, Victor Cruz, who is to be honored this afternoon from the New York Giants. So that's going to be big fun. And so anyway, stay tuned for the next program. And we'll be back in 3 weeks with another edition of Walden's Pond. And we hope you have a productive and peaceful week as you go about your business. And God willing, we'll be back with you in a few weeks here on Walden's Pond. Have a great Sunday. Take care.
Take you as my queen. I'd have no other way. And all over this kingdom we have made. Till then I'd be a fool, wishing for the day that I can change from one.
Humans make mistakes. Accidents happen. It's always been that way. It's no different with fracking. No matter how many safety measures are put in place, blowing up bedrock, injecting toxic chemicals, and sucking the hazardous waste back to the surface is dangerous work, and accidents will happen. But fracking companies are exempt from the federal laws designed to protect citizens and keep air and water clean. Unless Governor Cuomo stands up to the oil and gas industry, high-volume, high-pressure, horizontal slickwater hydrofracking is coming to New York State. It's a risk-benefit thing. We take the risk. Fracking companies get the benefit. If this sounds wrong to you, take a minute and tell Governor Cuomo to do the right thing by saying no to fracking in New York. This message is brought to you by WBAI and the producers of Green Street. Join us at amillionfrackingletters.com.
How much do you love, create, and contribute to the visual arts? Well, join WBAI for a 2-day art exhibit and silent auction in Manhattan. We need you, that's working artists, and your quality pieces to join the select work of other contemporary artists. Email your images to auction@wbai.org. That's auction@wbai.org. WBAI, in the world of the arts.
Hi, I'm Danny Glover.
This is Saul Williams.
And this is Michael Fried from Spearhead. And this is WBAI, listener-supported, non-commercial radio in New York.
This is Reverend Jesse Jackson of the Rainbow Push Coalition. Please call and support WBAI, non-commercial peace and justice radio in New York.